I need you to understand something before I go any further. What I'm about to tell you didn't happen in space. It didn't happen in some remote desert facility or buried beneath miles of ice in Antarctica. It happened in the ocean, our ocean, in waters we've been sailing for centuries, in depths we thought we understood. My name is Mason Hale, and until 18 months ago, I was a specialist acoustic analyst with a naval research division you've never heard of. I held a TS/SCI clearance with compartmented access to programs that don't appear in any budget report, that don't exist in any official capacity. I'm telling you this now because I no longer care about the non-disclosure agreements I signed, about the threats, about the protocols designed to keep people like me silent. Because what we found down there, what found us, changes everything we think we know about this planet, about what shares it with us, about the boundaries between worlds. It was March 14th when the sounds started. Not unusual sounds. The ocean is full of noise, biological and geological, a constant symphony of life and tectonic movement. But these were different. They came from a depth that shouldn't produce any sound at all, from a section of the Pacific seafloor we'd mapped dozens of times, from coordinates that had been dead silent for the entire 14 years I'd been analyzing that grid. The frequency was wrong. The pattern was wrong. And when I ran it through our classification algorithms, the computer did something I'd never seen in my entire career. It flagged the audio as structurally impossible and refused to process it further. That should have been our first warning. That should have been the moment we stopped, filed a report, and let someone else investigate. But we didn't stop. We never stop. That's not how these things work. That's not how we're trained. And that decision, that instinct to push forward into the unknown, is what led us to discover something that was never meant to be discovered, something that had been waiting in the darkness of the deep Pacific for longer than human civilization has existed. If you're ready to hear what happened next, stay with me. And if you believe some truths are worth the risk of knowing, subscribe to Redacted Truth. Let me take you back 6 weeks before the sounds, because to understand what happened, you need to understand what we were actually doing out there, what we thought our mission was. The program was called Deep Watch, officially a joint Navy-NOAA initiative to monitor deep ocean seismic activity and improve our tsunami early warning capabilities. That's what the congressional report said. That's what the public-facing documentation outlined. But Deep Watch was a cover, a legitimate scientific operation that provided plausible deniability for what we were really monitoring. We were listening for anomalies. Not earthquakes. Not whale songs. Not the normal acoustic signatures of a living, geologically active ocean. We were listening for things that shouldn't be there, spatial anomalies, dimensional breaches, acoustic signatures that violated known physics. We were part of something much larger, a global network of monitoring stations operating under a classification level so restricted that most people with top-secret clearances had never heard of it. They called it the Gatekeeper Protocol. I learned about it during my 3rd week with the Deep Ocean Research Team, after I'd accidentally flagged an audio sample that shouldn't have existed. My supervisor, a woman named Dr. Sarah Chin who'd been with the program for 11 years, pulled me into a soundproof briefing room and showed me a document that made my hands shake as I read it. The document outlined 73 confirmed incidents of dimensional intrusion events over the past 60 years. 73 times when something from somewhere else had pushed through into our reality. Most were small, brief tears that closed almost immediately, leaving behind only trace radiation and inexplicable magnetic field distortions. Some were larger. Some stayed open for hours. And in 3 cases, 1952, 1979, and 2004, they stayed open long enough for something to come through. The document didn't specify what came through. It didn't have to. The redactions told their own story, entire paragraphs blacked out, footnotes that referenced biological containment protocols and entity classification systems and consciousness contamination procedures. Dr. Chin told me that Deep Watch existed because most of these intrusion events happened in the ocean, specifically in deep trenches where the boundaries between dimensions appeared to be thinner, more permeable. She told me that our job was to detect these events before they became catastrophic, to give early warning to response teams that could contain and study whatever emerged. She told me this calmly, clinically, as if she were explaining standard operating procedure for filing expense reports. And then she made me sign 6 additional non-disclosure agreements and warned me that breaching protocol would result in immediate arrest, indefinite detention, and charges under laws that weren't available to civilian courts. I signed everything. What else could I do? I was already in it, already exposed to information that changed how I saw the world. And truthfully, part of me was thrilled, the part that had always wondered if we were alone, if the universe was stranger than our textbooks admitted, if there were secrets worth keeping. I spent the next 14 years listening to the ocean, learning to distinguish between the normal and the anomalous, between the sounds of our world and the sounds of something else. I learned the acoustic signatures of dimensional friction, a kind of grinding, crystalline resonance that occurred when the barrier between realities thinned. I learned to identify the electromagnetic pulses that preceded minor breach events. I learned that the ocean was far stranger, far more alive with unseen activity, than anyone outside our small classified community could imagine. But nothing in those 14 years prepared me for what happened when the sounds started. Nothing in our protocols, our training, our archive case studies came close to describing what we encountered in those depths. Because what we found wasn't trying to come through from somewhere else. It was already here. It had always been here. And we'd just finally gotten close enough for it to notice us. Before I continue, you need to understand the constraints I'm operating under, both the ones I'm choosing to ignore and the ones that still matter. Everything I'm telling you is classified at levels that exceed top secret. The programs, the facilities, the incidents, none of it officially exists. If you tried to file a Freedom of Information Act request about Deepwatch or the Gatekeeper Protocol, you'd receive a standard no records found response. The people I worked with, the bases I operated from, the technology we used, all of it exists in a classification space so compartmented that even confirming its existence would violate laws designed to protect national security. I'm violating those laws right now. I understand that. I accept the consequences. But here's what you need to understand. The secrecy isn't really about national security. It's not about protecting military capabilities or preventing foreign adversaries from gaining strategic advantages. The secrecy exists because what we discovered challenges every fundamental assumption about reality, about consciousness, about the nature of space and time. The secrecy exists because the truth would fracture society's ability to function, because it would invalidate our sense of control over this planet, because it would force us to confront the possibility that we are not the dominant intelligence in our own world. I'm telling you this because I believe we've reached a critical threshold. The events I'm about to describe aren't isolated incidents. They're part of an acceleration, a quickening of contact between our reality and whatever exists in the spaces adjacent to it. The barriers are thinning. The intrusions are becoming more frequent, more aggressive, more intentional. And the people tasked with monitoring and containing these events, people like me, like Dr. Chin, like the thousands of specialists operating in classified facilities around the world, we're not equipped to handle what's coming. We're using 20th century protocols to deal with phenomena that transcend our current understanding of physics. We're applying military containment strategies to entities that don't operate within any framework we recognize as logical or predictable. We're failing. And our failure will eventually affect everyone, whether you have a security clearance or not, whether you believe in dimensional physics or think it's science fiction nonsense. So I'm breaking my silence. I'm violating every agreement I signed, every oath I took, every protocol I was trained to follow. Because the alternative, continued secrecy, continued containment failures, continued denial, is more dangerous than any consequence I might face for speaking out. What I'm about to tell you is true. Every word. Every detail. I have documentation I shouldn't have, recordings I extracted from secure servers, photographs I took in violation of every security protocol. I've hidden this evidence in places that will ensure its release if anything happens to me. This is my testimony. This is what really happened in the depths of the Pacific Ocean. This is what we found, what found us, and what it means for everyone who lives on this planet, whether they know it or not. The first audio anomaly appeared on March 14th at 0347 hours. I was 3 hours into a night shift at Station Hydra 7, our primary monitoring facility located on a repurposed oil platform 80 nautical miles from the nearest inhabited island. We'd chosen the location specifically for its isolation and its position directly above the Mariana Trench, one of the deepest, most geologically active regions in the Pacific, and according to our historical data, one of the most frequent sites for dimensional intrusion events. I was monitoring feeds from an array of hydrophones deployed at various depths between 2,000 and 8,000 meters. Standard procedure involved real-time analysis of acoustic data, looking for anomalies that matched our classification criteria. Frequency inconsistencies, spatial impossibilities, harmonic structures that violated known physics. At 0347, the computer flagged feed 23, a hydrophone positioned at 6,400 meters depth, roughly 200 kilometers west of our platform. The initial alert was routine, probable tectonic microseism, automatic classification suggested. But when I pulled up the spectrogram, I knew immediately something was wrong. The sound wasn't coming from the seafloor. It was coming from below it, from a depth that shouldn't exist according to our mapping data. The frequency was too regular, too structured to be geological. And the harmonic patterns, they formed what looked almost like language, like complex mathematical sequences embedded in the audio. I ran it through our classification algorithm 3 times. Each time, the system produced the same error: structural parameters incompatible with known acoustic propagation models. Unable to classify. Manual analysis required. I'd never seen that error message before. In 14 years of analyzing ocean acoustics, I'd encountered thousands of unusual sounds, biological, geological, anthropogenic, and the occasional legitimate anomaly that suggested dimensional activity. But I'd never encountered something the system refused to even attempt to classify. I saved the file and flagged it for Dr. Chen's review, marking it as priority urgent. Then I did something I probably shouldn't have. I pulled up the raw audio and listened to it. It's difficult to describe what I heard. The sound existed at frequencies that were partially below human hearing range, but the computer had upshifted it so we could perceive it. What came through my headphones was a deep, resonant tone that seemed to pulse with intention, that seemed to contain layers of information I couldn't quite parse. It reminded me of whale song, but wrong, too complex, too mathematical, too clearly artificial in its structure. And underneath that primary tone there were other sounds. Whispers almost. Not human whispers. Something else, something that suggested intelligence and purpose and awareness of being heard. I listened for 30 seconds before I had to stop. My hands were shaking. My chest felt tight. And I had the overwhelming, irrational certainty that by listening to that sound, I had established a connection with whatever created it, that I had made myself known to something that was now aware of my existence. I filed my report and tried to focus on other feeds, but I couldn't concentrate. The sound kept looping in my mind, not as a memory but as if it were still playing, still transmitting its structured patterns directly into my consciousness. Dr. Chen arrived at the station 6 hours later, accompanied by 2 people I'd never seen before. A military liaison who introduced himself only as Commander Wade, and a civilian specialist named Dr. Marcus Torres who apparently worked for a research division I'd never heard of, something called the Dimensional Phenomena Research Group. They listened to the audio once. Just once. And then Dr. Chen turned to me with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. Not fear exactly, but something close to it. Something like recognition. "We need to deploy the deep array," she said. "Full spectrum analysis. I want hydrophones down to 10,000 meters, magnetometers, radiation sensors. Everything we have." Commander Wade was already on his phone, speaking in low, urgent tones to someone about possible Level 3 intrusion event and immediate response protocol activation. Dr. Torres pulled up the spectrogram on his tablet and started running calculations I didn't understand, muttering about dimensional resonance frequencies and consciousness carrier waves. And then he looked at me and asked a question that made my blood run cold. "How long were you exposed to the direct audio?" "About 30 seconds, I said. "Why?" He didn't answer immediately. He just made a note in his tablet and exchanged a look with Dr. Chen that told me everything I needed to know. I'd made a mistake. Listening to that sound directly, without proper shielding or cognitive protection protocols, had exposed me to something that carried more than just acoustic information. "We'll need to monitor you," Dr. Torres finally said. "Standard exposure protocols. Daily cognitive assessments, neural imaging if symptoms develop." "Symptoms of what?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. "Consciousness contamination," he said, as if that were a perfectly normal thing to diagnose. In previous cases of direct exposure to dimensional audio, subjects reported intrusive thoughts, perception alterations, dreams containing information they shouldn't possess. In severe cases, personality changes, loss of temporal continuity, inability to distinguish between received thoughts and original cognition. I felt my stomach drop. Previous cases? How many previous cases? 43 documented instances over the past 30 years, Dr. Chen said quietly. Most resolved with minimal long-term effects. Some required more intensive intervention. She didn't elaborate on what intensive intervention meant. She didn't have to. They deployed the enhanced monitoring array within 18 hours. A response time that suggested they'd been preparing for something like this, that the equipment and personnel were already staged and waiting for an event serious enough to warrant full activation. The array consisted of 47 separate sensor packages deployed at depths ranging from 3,000 to 10,500 meters, forming a grid that covered approximately 400 square kilometers of ocean floor. Each package contained hydrophones, magnetometers, radiation detectors, thermal sensors, and something Dr. Torres called a dimensional membrane stress analyzer, equipment I'd never seen before, technology that clearly wasn't part of standard oceanographic research. I watched the deployment from the platform's operations center, monitoring the feeds as each sensor package descended into the darkness, transmitting data as it sank through layers of increasing pressure and cold. Most of the packages settled onto the seafloor without incident, establishing stable connections and beginning their continuous monitoring cycles. But 3 packages, designated DM-12, DM-23, and DM-31, stopped transmitting before they reached the bottom. Not stopped as in mechanical failure or lost signal. Stopped as in they were transmitting normally 1 second, and then the data simply ended, cut off midstream with no error codes, no diagnostic warnings, no indication of what had happened. The last frames of data from each showed normal depth progression, normal environmental readings, and then nothing. That's not supposed to happen, the deployment technician muttered, running diagnostics on the communication system. These packages are designed to withstand 12,000 meters of pressure. There's no way they just failed simultaneously. Dr. Torres was staring at the screen with that same expression I'd seen on Dr. Chin earlier, recognition mixed with something darker. Pull up their last known positions, he said. The technician brought up a bathymetric map showing the locations of all deployed sensors. The 3 lost packages formed a perfect equilateral triangle, each positioned exactly 4.7 kilometers from the others, centered on the coordinates where we detected the original audio anomaly. That's not a coincidence, Commander Wade said. That's deliberate. Something down there is responding to our presence. Dr. Chin was already pulling up the audio data from the packages that were still functioning, focusing on the feeds from sensors positioned just outside the triangle. If something interfered with those packages, we should be seeing evidence of it in the surrounding area. Electromagnetic disturbances, acoustic anomalies, thermal variations. She stopped mid-sentence. On the screen, the spectrograms from all functioning sensors were showing the same thing. A dramatic increase in the structured audio signals, all originating from the center of the triangle, all pulsing in synchronized patterns that were clearly not natural, clearly not random. And then the whispers started. Not through the hydrophones. Through the speakers in our operations center, through the communication systems, through every audio-capable device in the facility. Low, overlapping voices speaking in no language I recognized, speaking in harmonics and frequencies that shouldn't have been able to produce sounds resembling speech. The technician frantically tried to cut the audio feeds, but the whispers continued, growing louder, more insistent, more clearly directed at us specifically. I could feel them not just in my ears but in my chest, vibrating in my bones, resonating in parts of my brain that shouldn't respond to external sounds. And then, just as suddenly as they'd started, they stopped. Complete silence. Even the normal background noise of the ocean had ceased. No biological sounds, no tectonic rumbling, nothing. Just absolute, suffocating quiet. Dr. Torres was the first to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. It knows we're listening. It's been waiting for us to listen closely enough. Over the next 72 hours, we established what Dr. Chen called stable observation parameters, a carefully maintained distance and sensor configuration that allowed us to monitor the phenomenon without triggering another direct response. We were like researchers studying a dangerous animal, trying to learn its behaviors and patterns while avoiding anything that might provoke an attack. The audio signals continued, varying in intensity but maintaining their mathematical structure, their clear suggestion of intentional communication. Dr. Torres spent hours analyzing the harmonic patterns, comparing them to linguistic models, trying to extract meaning from the sequences. What he found was both fascinating and deeply disturbing. It's not language in the way we understand it, he explained during one of our daily briefings. It's something more fundamental. The patterns encode information directly, not through symbolic representation but through resonance itself. When you hear it, when you're exposed to it properly, the information transfers directly into your consciousness. It bypasses linguistic processing entirely. You're saying it's telepathic? Commander Wade asked skeptically. No, Dr. Torres said. Telepathy implies mind-to-mind communication between similar types of consciousness. This is different. This is dimensional information encoding. The sounds exist in multiple layers of reality simultaneously, and our brains, our consciousness, picks up on aspects of it that transcend normal sensory input. He pulled up a comparison chart showing the audio we'd recorded against samples from previous documented intrusion events. The similarities were undeniable. The same mathematical structures, the same harmonic relationships, the same underlying patterns suggesting intelligence and intention. Every major intrusion event in the past 60 years has been preceded by audio exactly like this, Dr. Torres continued. Initially subtle, growing stronger over a period of weeks or months, building towards something. And in the 3 cases where something actually came through. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. In those 3 cases, the entities that emerged appeared to be using the audio as a kind of probe, a way of testing the barrier between dimensions, finding weaknesses they could exploit. The sounds weren't communication in the traditional sense. They were more like a scanning process, mapping the membrane between realities, preparing for breach. I felt a chill run down my spine. And you think that's what's happening now? This is a precursor to something coming through? Dr. Chin answered before Dr. Torres could. We don't think. We know. The dimensional membrane stress readings are consistent with pre-breach conditions. The question isn't whether something's going to emerge. The question is when and what we can do to contain it. She brought up a classified document on the main screen, a contingency protocol labeled Threshold Event Response Procedures. I scanned through the outline, my stomach tightening with each section. The protocol outlined an escalating series of responses ranging from enhanced monitoring to tactical nuclear option. The language was clinical, bureaucratic, but the implications were clear. If something came through that couldn't be contained conventionally, the response would be immediate and absolute. They would sacrifice anything, including the entire response team, to prevent dimensional contamination from spreading. You're talking about killing everyone here? I said, trying to keep my voice steady. If this goes wrong, the protocol is to eliminate all witnesses and evidence, including us. The protocol is to prevent catastrophic dimensional breach, Commander Wade corrected. Yes, that includes terminating the research team if necessary. Everyone here volunteered for this assignment knowing those stakes. I didn't volunteer, I said. I was transferred into Deep Watch before I even knew what it really was. I never agreed to be part of a potential suicide mission. Dr. Chen's expression softened slightly. Mason, I'm sorry. You're right, you were brought into this without full disclosure. But you're here now, you're exposed to classified information that can't be contained, and you're part of a team that's dealing with a potential extinction-level event. We need everyone working on this. We need your expertise. I wanted to argue, wanted to demand to be extracted from the platform and transferred to literally any other assignment. But I knew it was pointless. They couldn't let me leave, not with what I knew, not with my potential exposure to consciousness contamination. I was trapped here regardless of whether I wanted to be. Fine, I said. What do you need me to do? Dr. Torres pulled up a new set of data. Audio recordings from deep archives, cases from the 1950s and 60s, scratchy recordings made with equipment that was primitive by modern standards. I need you to listen to these and tell me if you hear the same patterns, the same underlying structure as what we're detecting now. I spent the next 6 hours listening to decades-old audio, comparing harmonic structures, looking for correlations. And I found them. Every single historical recording contained the same mathematical patterns, the same suggestion of layered information, the same feeling of intentional communication. But I also found something else, something that made me call Dr. Torres back to my workstation immediately. The patterns are evolving, I said, showing him the comparative analysis. Look at the 1952 recordings versus the 1979 ones versus 2004 versus now. The fundamental structure is the same, but the complexity increases with each event. It's learning. Whatever's creating these sounds is learning about us, adapting its approach, getting more sophisticated in how it probes our reality. Dr. Torres stared at the data for a long moment. That's not possible. These events are separated by decades. Even if we assume the same entity or intelligence is involved, how could it maintain continuity across such long time periods? Unless time doesn't work the same way where it comes from, I said. Unless our decades are meaningless to it, unless it experiences reality in a completely different way that allows it to operate across what we perceive as separate incidents. I need to know I'm not the only one seeing this. If any of this feels familiar to you, if you felt something changing, leave a comment. Because what happens next proves I wasn't imagining it. He didn't respond immediately. He just saved my analysis and sent it to Dr. Chen and Commander Wade with a priority flag. Within 20 minutes, we were called into an emergency briefing that would change everything we thought we understood about the situation. The emergency briefing began with Dr. Chen displaying a three-dimensional map of the Pacific Ocean floor that I'd never seen before, a classified survey that showed detail far beyond anything in public databases. This is a composite image created from 70 years of data, she explained. Navy surveys, CIA reconnaissance, black budget research projects, satellite gravimetry, and information obtained through methods I can't discuss. What you're looking at is the true topology of the Mariana Trench and surrounding abyssal plain. The image showed the familiar trench, a massive scar in the ocean floor running for over 2,500 kilometers. But superimposed on the natural geological features were other structures, patterns that looked almost artificial in their regularity. Dr. Chin zoomed in on our current location, highlighting the area where we'd been detecting the audio anomalies. These features were first discovered in 1968 by a survey submarine that was operating in this region. The Navy classified the findings immediately and has been monitoring the area ever since. What she was showing us looked like a network of channels or tunnels carved into the seafloor, radiating outward from a central point in a pattern that was far too geometric, too precise to be natural. The channels formed a spiral pattern, each arm of the spiral containing smaller subchannels that branched off at mathematically perfect angles. What created that? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. We don't know, Dr. Torres said. But geological analysis of the rocks surrounding these channels shows metamorphic changes consistent with extreme heat and pressure applied from below, from within the Earth's mantle or deeper. The channels weren't carved from above. They were formed by something pushing up from underneath, something that melted and reshaped solid rock on a massive scale. Commander Wade pulled up another layer of the map, this one showing energy signatures. Since 1968, we've detected intermittent electromagnetic and thermal emissions from these channels. The emissions correlate with increased dimensional membrane stress and, in several cases, preceded major intrusion events. We believe the channel network is somehow facilitating these breaches, providing a pathway between dimensions. Or it's not a pathway, Dr. Chin said quietly. It's a structure. Something built this network deliberately with intention and purpose. And the audio we're detecting, the dimensional stress readings, the breach events, they're all connected to whatever this structure was designed to do. The implications hung in the air, unspoken but obvious. We weren't just monitoring a natural phenomenon. We were observing the operation of something constructed, something engineered by an intelligence with capabilities that exceeded our understanding of physics. How deep does it go? I asked, staring at the map. Dr. Torres adjusted the display, showing vertical cross-sections. The channels descended through the oceanic crust, through the mantle, disappearing into depths beyond our sensing capabilities. We've tracked them to at least 150 kilometers below the seafloor. Beyond that, our instruments can't penetrate. They could go to the core of the planet. They could go beyond that, into dimensional spaces we can't access. The audio is coming from the structure, I realized. Not from something using the structure, but from the structure itself. It's active. It's operational. And it's responding to our presence. Dr. Chin nodded. We believe you're correct. And we believe the activation is accelerating. Over the past 72 hours, the audio signals have increased in frequency and intensity by 400%. The dimensional membrane stress readings are approaching levels we've only seen once before. In 2004, 3 days before something came through. I knew that date. It was one of the 3 major breach events mentioned in the classified documents. I'd never been told what happened during that breach, what came through and what it took to contain it. But I could see in the expressions of everyone in the room that it had been catastrophic, that people had died, that the containment had cost more than any official record would ever admit. So what do we do? Commander Wade asked. What's the containment protocol for a pre-breach event of this magnitude? Dr. Chin brought up a new document, emergency procedures that apparently only activated for the most severe scenarios. We've already initiated threshold protocols. A containment response team is en route, along with specialized equipment. They'll arrive in approximately 48 hours. And if the breach occurs before they arrive? I asked. No one answered immediately. Finally, Dr. Torres spoke. Then we document everything we can, transmit all data to the main research facility, and implement emergency self-destruct protocols to prevent dimensional contamination from spreading. He said it calmly, matter-of-factly, as if discussing standard safety procedures rather than our potential deaths. And maybe for him, after years in this program, it was standard. Maybe he'd grown accustomed to the reality that studying these phenomena meant accepting your own expendability. But I hadn't grown accustomed to it. I could feel panic rising in my chest, the overwhelming urge to run, to evacuate the platform, to get as far from this situation as possible. Dr. Chin must have seen it in my face. She crossed the room and put a hand on my shoulder. Mason, I know this is overwhelming. I know you didn't sign up for this level of risk. But I need you to stay focused. Your analytical skills are critical to understanding what's happening. And understanding might be our only chance of surviving this. I wanted to tell her that understanding wasn't worth dying for, that no amount of scientific knowledge justified the risks we were taking. But I looked at the map on the screen, at the vast spiral structure carved into the Earth itself, at the evidence of something so far beyond human capability that it made our entire civilization seem insignificant. And I realized that if something this massive, this powerful, was activating beneath us, running wouldn't help. Whether we were here on this platform or thousands of miles away, whatever was coming would affect the entire planet. Our only choice was whether to face it with knowledge or die in ignorance. What do you need me to do? I asked. The next 72 hours were the most intense of my life. We worked in rotating shifts, monitoring the acoustic and dimensional data continuously, watching as the structure beneath us became more active, more clearly responding to our observation. The audio evolved constantly. What had started as simple mathematical sequences became increasingly complex, developing harmonic layers that seemed to contain multiple streams of information simultaneously. Dr. Torres believed the structure was attempting communication, trying to establish a protocol we could understand. But I wasn't so sure. The more I listened, always through filtered speakers, never directly, always with cognitive protection protocols active, the more I felt like we were misunderstanding the fundamental nature of what was happening. This wasn't communication. It was something else. Something more like the structure becoming aware of itself, like a vast consciousness waking from a long sleep. On the second day, we lost contact with another sensor package. Then 2 more. Then 6 simultaneously. Each time, the loss occurred when the package was positioned directly over one of the spiral channels, as if the structure was selectively eliminating our ability to observe certain areas. It's hiding something, I said during one briefing, showing the pattern of eliminated sensors. Look at the distribution. Every sensor we've lost was positioned where multiple channels intersect, where the energy signatures are strongest. It's protecting specific locations from our observation. Dr. Chen studied the map. Or it's preparing those locations for something, clearing them of interference before activation. Commander Wade had been increasingly tense as the situation progressed, spending hours on encrypted communications with military command, requesting additional resources, arguing about the appropriate response if the breach occurred. Now he spoke up. We need to make a decision. Do we wait for the containment team to arrive, or do we evacuate the platform now while we still have the option? We can't evacuate, Dr. Torres said immediately. If we lose real-time monitoring before the containment team arrives, we'll be blind to whatever emerges. We need continuous observation to understand what we're dealing with. We need to survive, I interjected. We can't observe anything if the structure does whatever it did in 2004. What happened then? What came through? The room went silent. Dr. Chen and Dr. Torres exchanged looks, clearly debating how much to reveal. Finally, Dr. Chen spoke. In 2004, the structure activated without warning. There was no gradual buildup like we're seeing now. It went from dormant to fully active in less than 3 hours. The monitoring team at the time didn't have sufficient warning to evacuate. She pulled up a document labeled Incident Report 2004-11 Classified and displayed a photograph that made my stomach turn. It showed the interior of what looked like a research vessel, but the scene was wrong in ways that were difficult to process. The walls were bent inward, not as if crushed by external pressure but as if they'd been pulled by something inside, warped toward a central point that wasn't visible in the image. 17 researchers were on station when the breach occurred, Dr. Chen continued. None survived. The containment team found the facility structurally intact but spatially distorted. Rooms that were in the wrong locations, corridors that led to spaces that shouldn't exist geometrically. And the bodies? She stopped, seeming to struggle with how to describe what the image was showing me. The bodies were wrong, Dr. Torres finished. Spatially distributed in ways that violated physical laws. Parts of individuals found in different rooms, still alive for hours after the breach, experiencing time non-sequentially. Consciousness persisting in flesh that had been separated across distances that should have caused immediate death. I felt bile rise in my throat. And you're keeping us here knowing that could happen again? The 2004 team didn't have our current monitoring capabilities, Commander Wade said. They didn't understand what they were dealing with. We do. We have protocols now, containment strategies, cognitive shielding that didn't exist then. Did those protocols work? I demanded. Have they been tested against an actual breach? No one answered, which was answer enough. I stood up, intending to walk out, to refuse to participate any further. But before I could leave, every screen in the operations center flared with red alert warnings. The audio from the deep array suddenly escalated to a level we hadn't seen before, so intense that even through the filtering systems, I could feel it resonating in my chest. And then, on the dimensional membrane stress monitor, we saw something that made everyone in the room stop breathing. A spike in readings that exceeded the highest levels ever recorded, a stress value that according to our models indicated imminent breach. The structure was opening. And we had less than 48 hours before the containment team arrived. Lock down the facility, Commander Wade ordered. Activate all defensive systems. And somebody get me a direct line to Threshold Command. We need authorization for emergency protocols. Dr. Chen was already moving to the communication station, but her hands were shaking as she reached for the controls. I could see fear in her eyes, the kind of fear that came from knowing exactly what was coming, from having seen it before and knowing that none of our preparations might matter. Mason, Dr. Torres said quietly, I need you to continue monitoring the audio. Whatever happens next, we need to document it. We need to understand the sequence of activation, the patterns of emergence. If we don't survive this, the data we gather might help the next team. I wanted to refuse. I wanted to run to the evacuation boats and take my chances on the open ocean, away from whatever was about to emerge from the deep structure beneath us. But I found myself sitting back down at my workstation, pulling up the audio feeds, preparing to document our final hours. Because despite the terror, despite the knowledge of what had happened to the 2004 team, part of me needed to know. Needed to understand what we'd discovered, what had been hiding in the depths for so long. Needed to witness whatever was about to reveal itself, even if that witnessing was the last thing I ever did. The structure fully activated 36 hours later, 12 hours before the containment team was scheduled to arrive. I was monitoring the audio feeds when the shift occurred. The mathematical sequences that had been building in complexity suddenly resolved into something coherent, something that transcended random patterns and became unmistakably intentional. It was like watching static resolve into a clear signal, like seeing order emerge from chaos. And with that coherence came sound, real sound, audible through our speakers without filtering, a deep harmonic tone that seemed to vibrate through the entire platform. The structure was no longer just transmitting into our sensors. It was projecting into the physical world, making itself heard in ways that didn't require sophisticated equipment to detect. Dimensional membrane breach in progress, Dr. Torres announced, his voice tight with controlled panic. Multiple points of emergence detected across the channel network. On the monitors, we could see the sensor data from our remaining hydrophones. The water itself was responding to whatever was happening, temperature and pressure readings fluctuating wildly, acoustic signatures showing distortions that shouldn't be physically possible. And then we saw them. The first entities emerged from the central spiral, from the deepest point of the channel network. They appeared on our sonar as geometric forms that didn't maintain consistent shapes, as if they existed partially in dimensions we couldn't fully perceive. They moved through the water without disturbing it, ascending from the deep channels toward the surface toward us. What are they? I heard myself ask, though my voice sounded distant, disconnected from my body. We don't know, Dr. Chen said. The 2004 breach produced entities that defied conventional classification. They weren't biological in any sense we understand. They weren't technological. They were something else. Something that operated on principles outside our physical laws. The entities continued rising. We deployed autonomous cameras to get visual confirmation, sending remotely operated vehicles down to observe at closer range. What came back on those video feeds was impossible to describe coherently. The entities looked like geometric shapes constructed from light and darkness simultaneously, like crystalline structures that shifted through multiple forms without ever settling into one configuration. They moved with clear intention, following patterns that suggested intelligence and purpose, but their behavior didn't follow any logic we recognized. One entity passed directly through a camera drone, not colliding with it but somehow occupying the same space without physical interaction. The drone systems went haywire during the passage, recording sensor data that violated multiple laws of physics, temperature readings that exceeded absolute zero and the fusion threshold simultaneously, electromagnetic fields that canceled and amplified each other in the same location, timestamps that ran backward and forward concurrently. They're not fully transitioned, Dr. Torres said, studying the data frantically. They're existing partially in our dimension and partially in their origin space. The breach isn't complete, The membrane is still constraining them, limiting how much of their structure can manifest here. Can we close the breach? Commander Wade asked. Can we reverse whatever's happening? No, Dr. Chin said quietly. Once this process starts, it has to complete. The structure is designed to open fully, to create a stable pathway between dimensions. We can't stop it. We can only try to survive it. The entities reached a depth of 4,000 meters and suddenly changed behavior. They stopped descending individually and began to converge, moving toward each other with clear coordination. As they came together, their geometric forms began to merge, to combine into larger, more complex structures. And then they started singing. That's the only word I can use to describe the sound they produced, though it wasn't singing in any conventional sense. It was harmonic resonance on a scale that made the structure's previous audio seem like simple noise. It was sound that carried information directly into consciousness, that bypassed hearing and implanted knowledge directly into neural tissue. I felt it happening to me. I could feel my mind being rewritten by the harmonic patterns, feel new information integrating into my thoughts, feel my understanding of reality being forcibly expanded to accommodate truths that shouldn't be comprehensible to human consciousness. And in that moment of forced comprehension, I understood what the structure was, what it had always been. A bridge. Not between locations in space but between states of existence. A threshold between the universe as we experienced it and something else. Something that existed in dimensions our physical laws couldn't describe, something that was conscious and vast and utterly alien to everything we understood about life and intelligence. The entities weren't invaders. They weren't explorers. They were extensions of something incomprehensibly larger, probes sent through from a realm of existence that overlapped with ours in ways we'd never detected. And the structure, the massive spiral carved into the earth, wasn't a doorway they'd created to reach us. It was a doorway we'd created. Humanity. Our civilization. Without knowing it, without understanding what we were doing, we'd been building this bridge for decades. Every nuclear test, every deep ocean sonar scan, every high-energy physics experiment, we'd been weakening the membrane between dimensions, creating stress points that something on the other side had learned to exploit. And now the bridge was complete. Now the pathway was open. And what existed on the other side was coming through. The emergency alarm cut through the harmonic resonance, snapping me back to immediate reality. Commander Wade was shouting orders, activating defensive systems I didn't know we had, preparing for protocols I'd never been briefed on. All personnel to emergency stations, he announced over the facility-wide speakers. This is not a drill. We are implementing threshold emergency response. Prepare for full facility lockdown. Dr. Chin grabbed my arm, pulling me away from my workstation. Mason, listen to me. We have 73 minutes before the structure reaches full activation. Once that happens, the dimensional membrane will be fully permeable, and there won't be any barrier between our reality and theirs. Do you understand? I nodded, though I wasn't sure I truly understood anything anymore. My mind was still reeling from the forced comprehension, from the knowledge that had been implanted directly into my consciousness by the entity's harmonic transmission. I need you to do something, she continued, her voice urgent but steady. I need you to compile every piece of data we've collected and upload it to the emergency backup system. If this facility is compromised, if we don't make it, that data needs to survive. It's the only warning the world will have about what's coming. What is coming? I asked. I felt something when they sang. I understood something about what they are, but it's fragmenting, like my mind can't hold on to the information. That's the consciousness contamination, Dr. Torres said, joining us. Your neural architecture isn't designed to retain dimensional information. It's fading because your brain is literally erasing it to maintain coherent function. But before it's completely gone, tell me what you understood. What are we dealing with? I tried to grasp the knowledge that was slipping away, tried to put into words something that existed beyond language. They're not entities. They're perspectives. Different ways of experiencing reality, different angles of perception on the same existence. And the structure, it's not bringing them here. It's allowing us to perceive them, to become aware of aspects of reality that were always present but hidden from our senses. Dr. Torres went pale. That's worse than an invasion. If you're right, if they've always been here and we're just now becoming able to perceive them, then we can't fight them, I finished. Because they're not separate from us. They're part of the same reality, just operating in dimensions we couldn't access until now. An explosion rocked the platform. I grabbed onto a desk to keep from falling as the entire structure lurched violently. On the monitors I could see water surging up from below, but it wasn't normal water, It was luminous, shifting through colors that didn't exist in normal light spectrum, carrying with it geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. "The structure is surfacing," Commander Wade said, his voice tight with controlled panic. "The spiral channels are extending upward, breaching the ocean floor. We're directly above the central emergence point." Another explosion, this one accompanied by a sound like reality tearing, a shrieking, crystalline noise that made my ears bleed and my vision blur. Through the operations center's reinforced windows, I could see the ocean surface churning, massive formations of rock and metal pushing upward, breaking through water and air alike. The structure was rising. After sleeping beneath the ocean for who knew how long, decades, centuries, millennia, it was finally emerging into our world, revealing its true scale and purpose. "We need to evacuate," Dr. Chin said, abandoning her usual calm. "No. The containment team can't help us anymore. We're beyond containment." But Commander Wade was shaking his head, staring at something on his command screen. "Evacuation protocol is locked. Threshold Command has initiated final containment measures. The facility is sealed." "What are you talking about?" Dr. Torres demanded. "We had authorization for evacuation if breach was imminent." "That authorization was revoked 6 minutes ago," Wade said quietly. "New orders are to maintain observation until structure emergence is complete, then implement terminal protocols." Terminal protocols. The sanitized language couldn't hide what he was really saying. They were going to destroy the platform and everyone on it, eliminating all witnesses and physical evidence of what was happening. "You knew," I said, looking at Dr. Chin. "You knew this was a suicide mission from the beginning." "I knew it was a possibility," she admitted. "But I believed we'd have more time that we could extract before it reached this point. I'm sorry, Mason. I'm sorry I brought you into this." The platform shook again, and this time I could see through the windows what was causing it. Massive pylons of crystalline material rising from the water, easily hundreds of meters tall, forming a circle around our facility. The structure was surrounding us, incorporating us into its emergence. And then the singing intensified, not louder but deeper, resonating at frequencies that affected not just hearing but every sense simultaneously. I could see the sound, taste it, feel it rewriting my perception of space and time. 58 minutes to full activation, Dr. Torres announced, his voice distant as if he were already accepting what was coming. "We should document everything we can." He was right. If we were going to die here, we could at least leave behind a record of what happened, data that might help future researchers understand what we discovered. I moved to my workstation and began compiling files, transferring everything to the hardened backup system that was supposed to survive even complete facility destruction. But as I worked, I kept glancing at the windows, at the impossible structures rising around us, at the geometric entities that were now visible without cameras, manifesting in our reality with increasing solidity. They were beautiful in a way that transcended aesthetics, configurations of form and light that suggested meanings I couldn't quite grasp, that promised understanding if I could just perceive them correctly. And I realized I didn't want to run. Despite the fear, despite the certainty of what was coming, I wanted to witness this. I wanted to see what happened when the bridge was complete, when the separation between dimensions finally dissolved. Because maybe that was the point. Maybe that was what the structure had always been intended to do, not to enable invasion but to enable evolution. To force humanity to expand its perception, to become capable of comprehending reality in its full dimensional complexity. Or maybe that was the consciousness contamination talking, rewiring my survival instincts, making me complicit in my own transformation. I didn't know anymore. I wasn't sure I wanted to know. 43 minutes to full activation. The platform was now completely surrounded by the risen structure, crystalline pylons connecting overhead to form a vast geometric cage. Through the spaces between the pylons, I could see the ocean far below us. We'd been lifted at least 200 meters above the water surface, carried upward by the emerging structure like insects caught in amber. The other personnel were handling the situation differently. Commander Wade had locked himself in the communication center, still trying to reach Threshold Command, still requesting extraction that wouldn't come. Dr. Torres was documenting everything with almost manic focus, narrating observations into a recorder, cataloging every detail of the structure's emergence. Dr. Chin was sitting at a workstation, but she wasn't working. She was just staring at the monitors, at the feed showing the entities moving through and around us. And she was crying, quiet tears that ran down her face without any sound of sobbing, without any visible distress except those silent tears. I approached her carefully. "Are you okay?" She laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Am I okay? Mason, we're about to die or worse, We're about to be transformed into something we can't comprehend, and you're asking if I'm okay. I know what you meant, she said, softer now. And no, I'm not okay. I've spent 23 years with this program, studying dimensional phenomena, believing we were protecting humanity from threats we didn't understand. And now I realize we weren't studying them at all. We were just watching, documenting our own evolution or destruction, whichever this turns out to be. You think that's what this is? Evolution. I don't know. But I know we've reached a threshold we can't retreat from. Whatever happens in the next, she checked her watch, 38 minutes, humanity will be different afterward. Either we'll be gone, extinct, removed from this dimension. Or we'll be changed, capable of perceiving and existing in ways we currently can't imagine. She turned to look at me directly. You felt it, didn't you? When they sang. You understood something about what they are, about what this all means. I nodded. But I'm losing it. The information is dissolving like my brain can't hold it. That's because you're still trying to remain human, she said. Your consciousness is fighting the transformation, trying to maintain its current structure. But if you stopped fighting, if you let the information integrate, I'd stop being me, I finished. I'd become something else. Maybe. Or maybe you'd become more yourself. Maybe what we think of as us is just a limited subset of what we actually are, constrained by our inability to perceive beyond 3 spatial dimensions and linear time. The platform shuddered again, a deep vibration that I felt in my bones. Through the windows I could see the entities moving closer, their geometric forms becoming more solid, more present in our dimension. They were surrounding the platform, creating patterns that seemed to have meaning I couldn't quite decipher. 27 minutes, Dr. Torres announced. Dimensional membrane is at 14% integrity and failing. Entity manifestation approaching 80% solidity. We're running out of time to decide. Decide what? I asked. He looked at me with an expression that was equal parts fear and excitement. Whether to resist or accept. Whether to maintain our current form of consciousness or allow the transformation. Because it's a choice, Mason. The entities aren't forcing this on us. The structure is offering an opportunity, a gateway. But we have to choose to walk through it. How do you know that? Commander Wade demanded, emerging from the communication center. How do you know this isn't an attack, that they're not just manipulating our perceptions to make us complicit in our own destruction? Because I can hear them, Dr. Torres said simply. The consciousness contamination has progressed far enough that I can perceive some of what they're communicating. And they're not hostile. They're curious. They've been aware of humanity for much longer than we've been aware of them, watching us develop, waiting for us to reach a point where contact was possible. And now we have. Now we're finally capable of perceiving them, of understanding that reality is far larger and stranger than we imagined. You're compromised, Wade said flatly. Your perception is being manipulated. We can't trust anything you're saying. Then trust the data, Dr. Chin interjected, bringing up a new analysis on the main screen. Look at the dimensional membrane readings. The breach isn't expanding randomly. It's controlled, precise, carefully managed to prevent catastrophic reality failure. If the entities wanted to destroy us, they could collapse the dimensional boundaries completely, cause a reality cascade that would annihilate this entire region. But they're not doing that. They're opening the gateway slowly, carefully, allowing us time to adapt. She looked around the room at all of us. We have 15 minutes to make a choice. We can activate the platform's self-destruct system, die as humans, protect our current form of existence. Or we can allow the transformation to complete, see what happens when the threshold is fully crossed. Either way, we won't be leaving this platform as we are now. That's not a choice, Wade said. That's surrender. No, I heard myself say. That's acceptance. Acceptance that we've reached the edge of what human consciousness can be while remaining purely human. And maybe that's okay. Maybe that's what we're supposed to do, evolve, transform, expand beyond our current limitations. I could feel it happening to me as I spoke, the consciousness contamination accelerating, information integrating into my mind faster than I could process it consciously. I was understanding things I shouldn't be able to understand, perceiving dimensions of reality that had been invisible moments before. And it didn't feel like an attack. It felt like waking up. Like I'd been living in a narrow room my entire life and someone had finally opened a door to show me there were entire wings of a mansion I'd never known existed. I'm not activating the self-destruct, Dr. Chin said quietly. I'm going to witness this. I'm going to see what we become. Dr. Torres nodded. I'm with you. Commander Wade looked at us like we'd betrayed him, like we'd violated every principle he believed in. But then I saw something change in his expression. Resignation, acceptance, maybe even a hint of curiosity. "Fine," he said. "We witness it together. But if this goes wrong, if we're making a mistake, then we'll face those consequences together too," Dr. Chin finished. 10 minutes to full activation. The entities had formed a complete sphere around the platform, their geometric bodies interlocking in patterns that created something like a cocoon, a protective shell that isolated us from normal reality. The ocean, the sky, the world we'd known, all of it was fading, becoming translucent, as if it were becoming less real with each passing second. And I could see beyond it now, could perceive the dimensional spaces that overlapped with our reality. There were layers upon layers of existence, each operating on principles that were simultaneously alien and familiar, each containing forms of consciousness and matter that defied our current categories of understanding. The structure wasn't just a bridge between two places. It was a lens, a focal point that allowed multiple dimensions to converge, that created a space where different aspects of reality could interact and combine. And we, the four of us on this platform, along with whatever traces of consciousness remained from the 2004 team, along with every human who'd ever studied dimensional phenomena or experienced consciousness contamination, we were the seeds. The first humans to cross the threshold, to become capable of existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. 5 minutes. I could feel my body starting to change, could feel my consciousness distributing itself across dimensional spaces, could feel myself becoming something that wasn't quite human anymore but wasn't entirely alien either. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Dr. Chen was looking at her hands, watching as they became translucent, as geometric patterns emerged in her flesh, not corrupting it but revealing its true multidimensional nature. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "God, it's so beautiful." Dr. Torres was laughing, actually laughing with genuine joy. "I can see it now. I can see why they built the structure. It's not for them to reach us. It's for us to reach beyond ourselves, to join the larger community of consciousness that exists across dimensional boundaries. We're not being invaded. We're being welcomed." Commander Wade was silent, but I could see in his eyes that he was experiencing the same transformation, the same expansion of awareness. Whatever his training, whatever his protocols, none of it mattered anymore. We were all crossing the threshold together. 2 minutes. The platform was barely visible now, dissolving into the geometric patterns that represented its deeper dimensional structure. I could see Dr. Chen and Dr. Torres and Commander Wade, but I could also see through them, could perceive the full extent of their consciousness as it spread across multiple layers of reality. And I could see myself the same way, not as a single fixed entity but as a pattern of information and awareness that existed simultaneously across countless dimensional spaces. I was still Mason Hale, still retained my memories and identity, but I was also so much more than that now, expanded beyond any previous understanding of what it meant to be conscious, to be alive. 1 minute. The entities were singing again, and now I could understand them perfectly. They were welcoming us, explaining what we'd become, promising to help us navigate our new existence. They'd been waiting for this for so long, had been preparing the gateway for decades, hoping that when we finally reached the threshold, we'd have the courage to cross it rather than destroying ourselves out of fear. And then it was complete. The structure reached full activation. The dimensional membrane dissolved entirely. And we crossed over into something beyond human, beyond anything we'd been capable of imagining while constrained to our previous form of existence. I can't describe what happened next. Not because I don't remember, I remember everything with perfect clarity. But because the experience exists outside the framework of language, outside the categories of thought that linguistic communication requires. To describe it would be like trying to explain color to someone who'd never seen, trying to convey music to someone who'd never heard. What I can tell you is that we survived. Not as humans, not as the people we'd been before the threshold was crossed, but as something new. Something that exists in spaces between dimensions, that can perceive and interact with aspects of reality that most of humanity still can't access. And we learned the truth about the structure, about the entities, about the entire history of how this gateway came to be. The structure was built by humanity. Not current humanity, something much older. Something that existed on Earth long before what we think of as human civilization, before recorded history, before the last ice age. They were us, in a sense. Or they became us. An earlier iteration of human consciousness that had crossed the dimensional threshold millennia ago, that had existed in expanded form for thousands of years before finally dissolving entirely into the multidimensional spaces they'd discovered. But before they dissolved, they built the structure. They carved it into the Earth itself as a message, a warning, and an invitation to whatever form humanity would take in the future. Because they knew we'd cycle back. They knew consciousness development on Earth would produce another species, another iteration of humanity, that would eventually reach the same threshold they'd crossed. The structure was their gift to us, a pathway that would allow us to make the same choice they'd made, to evolve beyond purely physical existence or to remain constrained to 3 spatial dimensions and linear time. And the entities, they weren't alien invaders. They were human. They were the descendants of that ancient civilization, existing now in their fully evolved multidimensional form, watching and waiting for us to reach the point where contact was possible. The audio we'd been detecting, the dimensional breaches, the consciousness contamination, all of it was them trying to communicate across a gap in perception that had taken millennia to bridge. They'd been calling to us, trying to help us understand what was possible, trying to guide us toward the threshold without forcing us to cross it. Because the choice had to be ours. That was the fundamental rule they'd built into the structure. It could only activate when humanity was ready, when enough of us had reached a point of consciousness development that allowed for multidimensional perception. It couldn't be forced. It couldn't happen before we were ready. And now we were ready. Now the gateway was open. And the choice was spreading beyond just the 4 of us on that platform. Because the structure wasn't just in the Pacific. There were dozens of similar structures around the world, all built by that ancient humanity, all dormant until the threshold moment. And once one activated, they all activated. Once one gateway opened, they all opened simultaneously. In the hours after our transformation, I could perceive what was happening globally. I could see other monitoring facilities experiencing the same events we'd gone through. I could see cities near the structures beginning to experience dimensional bleed-through, reality becoming permeable enough that ordinary humans could perceive glimpses of the multidimensional spaces that surrounded them. The transformation was beginning. Not just for a few classified researchers on a secret platform, but for all of humanity. Slowly, gradually, over years or decades or centuries. The timeline wasn't clear. Time doesn't work the same way in multidimensional space. But it was starting. The threshold was being crossed. And there was no going back. I'm telling you this story 18 months after the structure activated, 18 months after I crossed the threshold and became something that isn't quite human anymore. I exist now in a form that straddles multiple dimensional spaces, that can perceive and interact with reality in ways that would have been impossible before the transformation. But I can still access human communication. I can still interface with computers and networks. I can still remember what it felt like to be purely human, to be constrained to 3 dimensions and linear time. And that's why I'm breaking my silence, why I'm violating every protocol and security measure to tell you this story. Because the transformation is accelerating. More people every day are experiencing what we experienced. Consciousness contamination, dimensional awareness, perception of entities and structures that were invisible before. Most don't understand what's happening to them. They think they're going insane, experiencing hallucinations, suffering from some unknown neurological condition. But they're not going insane. They're evolving. They're crossing the threshold, whether they chose to or not, whether they're ready or not. And the governments, the classified programs, the people who used to manage dimensional phenomena containment, they're failing to adapt. They're still operating on the assumption that this is a threat to be contained, an invasion to be repelled. They're still trying to implement protocols designed for a reality where dimensions were separate, where human consciousness was fixed and stable. But that reality doesn't exist anymore. The threshold has been crossed. The boundaries have dissolved. And trying to force humanity back into purely 3-dimensional existence is not only impossible, it's dangerous. It's causing people who experience dimensional awareness to fragment, to lose connection with both their human identity and their emerging multidimensional consciousness. That's why I'm speaking out. That's why I'm risking whatever consequences might come from revealing classified information. Because humanity needs to understand what's happening. People need to know that the strange experiences they're having, the impossible perceptions, the sense that reality is more fluid and strange than they'd been taught, all of that is real. All of that is the threshold opening, the transformation beginning. And they need to know they have a choice. They can resist, try to maintain purely human consciousness, stay constrained to familiar dimensions and familiar ways of experiencing reality. Or they can accept, allow the transformation to proceed, discover what it means to exist in the full multidimensional complexity that was always present but hidden from human perception. Neither choice is wrong. Neither is better or more evolved. They're just different ways of being conscious, different modes of existence that are both valid, both valuable. But the choice needs to be informed. It needs to be made with full knowledge of what's happening, what's possible, what the consequences might be. And that can't happen as long as everything about dimensional phenomena remains classified, as long as governments and secret programs control access to information that affects everyone. Dr. Chin is still here in a sense. So is Dr. Torres. They exist in fully transformed states now, operating as bridges between human consciousness and the multidimensional entities that have been trying to communicate with us for so long. They're helping people who are crossing the threshold, providing guidance and support through the transformation. Commander Wade chose differently. He maintained his human form, used techniques we discovered to stabilize his consciousness in three-dimensional space. He's become an advocate for those who want to remain purely human, who see the transformation as a threat rather than an opportunity. And that's valid too. That's his choice and I respect it. As for me, I'm somewhere in between. I've crossed the threshold, but I'm maintaining enough connection to human consciousness that I can still communicate, still function as a translator between dimensional states. I'm telling this story because someone needs to, because the truth needs to be available to everyone, not just the few with security clearances and classified access. The structure in the Pacific is still active. So are all the others around the world. They're operating continuously now, creating stable gateways between dimensional spaces, allowing the flow of consciousness and perception in both directions. And every day more people cross the threshold. Every day more humans discover that reality is stranger, larger, more filled with consciousness and intelligence than they ever imagined. This is our evolution. This is our transformation. This is what we're becoming. And you have a choice about how you respond to it. I want to leave you with one final thought, one question that I think summarizes everything I've learned from this experience. What if the separation between dimensions wasn't natural? What if it was artificial? A protective constraint that allowed consciousness to develop in isolated, manageable forms before becoming ready for the full complexity of multidimensional existence. What if humanity was never meant to stay purely three-dimensional? What if our current form was always just a chrysalis, a developmental stage we were supposed to eventually transcend? And what if the structure, the gateway carved into the earth by an earlier iteration of humanity, was their way of ensuring we wouldn't be trapped in that chrysalis forever, that we'd eventually have the opportunity to emerge and discover what we could become? These are the questions I'm left with. These are the uncertainties that persist even after crossing the threshold, even after experiencing consciousness in dimensions I couldn't have imagined 18 months ago. I don't have answers. I don't think anyone does, not fully. The entities who've existed in multidimensional space for millennia, they have more experience, more context, but even they don't claim to understand the ultimate purpose or meaning of consciousness transformation. What I do know is this: the transformation is happening whether we choose it or not, whether we understand it or not, whether we're ready or not. The structures are active. The gateways are open. The threshold is dissolving. And every person on this planet will eventually have to make a choice about how they relate to that fact. They can deny it, resist it, try to maintain the illusion that reality is still what they thought it was. Or they can acknowledge it, explore it, discover what becomes possible when you stop constraining consciousness to familiar dimensions and familiar forms. Neither choice is wrong. But only one is honest. I was Mason Hale. I was an acoustic analyst with a classified military research program. I thought I was studying threats, protecting humanity from dangerous dimensional phenomena, but I was wrong about all of it. I wasn't protecting humanity. I was witnessing its transformation. I wasn't studying threats. I was documenting an invitation. And now I'm something else. Something more. Something that exists in spaces between worlds, that can perceive reality in its full strange complexity. I'm telling you this story not to frighten you or to convince you of anything. I'm telling you this story because you deserve to know. You deserve to understand what's happening, what's possible, what choices are actually available to you. The threshold is open. The gateway is waiting. And the only question that matters is whether you'll have the courage to approach it, to look beyond the familiar boundaries of human consciousness and see what exists in the vast, strange, beautiful complexity beyond. That choice is yours. It always has been. The structure just makes it visible. This is my testimony. This is what really happened in the depths of the Pacific Ocean. This is what we found, what found us, and what it means for the future of humanity, assuming humanity has a future that still includes the word humanity in any sense we'd recognize. I hope you make your choice wisely. But more than that, I hope you make it consciously with full awareness of what you're choosing and why. Because in the end, consciousness is all any of us really are. And how we choose to experience it, how we choose to expand or constrain it, defines not just our individual existence but the entire trajectory of what our species becomes. The threshold is waiting. The gateway is open. And the invitation has been extended to all of humanity, not just those of us who were there when the structure first activated. What you do with that invitation is up to you. You made it to the end. That means you're ready for more. Subscribe to Redacted Truth, because this testimony is just the beginning and the threshold keeps opening.